Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 10th chapter in the book of Job. And this is the capstone of what began in the 9th chapter. This is Job's third speech. He's the one who launches it off in the 3rd chapter. Then we hear from Eliphaz the Temanite in 5 through 7. In 6 through 7, that's Job's second response. And then chapter 8 is Bildad. And then Job answers him in the 9th chapter. We feel we've taken this lesson far enough to not review as extensively in the details and the scopes that we have before. So we're just going to review Job's answer to Bildad. They are struggling to make sense of his suffering, which was visited upon him in the 1st and 2nd chapters as a challenge from Satan that Yahweh accepted. So Job was part of something greater than himself. He was the focal point of a cosmic struggle between good and evil. But he's struggling to make sense of it. He wants to know why. And it's as we progress in this lesson, we intend to communicate why it was a good thing that Job was not privy to the dialogue between heaven and Yahweh and Satan. So in response to his friend's Bildad, his comforter, he says in the 2nd verse, "Truly I know it is so, but how is a man right with Elohim?" So this launches the question which forms the first section of the 9th chapter. We divided this chapter in two. We're going to comment sparingly on this section. The next question is in the 14th verse. So he expounds basically on his wisdom and more extensively his might. He can uplift mountains and shake the earth, and the sun is in his command and his control. He made all the constellations that were visible in the heaven. He performs miracles and wonders, unsearchable deeds and innumerable wonders. They're literally without count. He is performing miracles not only across the universe, but across the world as we speak right now. There's at least one miracle going on somewhere in his universe. It's certainly, if not this world. But Job says, "Look, he goes by me, I do not see, and he moves past, and I do not discern him." So he's aware that he is visited. He is being, perhaps he doesn't know he's being tested, but he's being punished, and that is his form of visitation. So he has the sense that there's a supernatural power who has his eye on him, but he can't see him. He can't make sense of him. He thought he knew him, but then suddenly all this unmerited suffering and abuse was inflicted in him. He lost everything at once, and he lost his health and his wealth and his family as well. So in the 14th verse, now Bildad, we should have qualified, he does, one of the things Eliphaz does to his credit is he stimulates the search in Job. So prior he's just wishing for death, but then he's not really, doesn't have any initiative for investigative inquiry, but Bildad, Eliphaz does start the momentum in that direction. And the one thing that Bildad does is he asks the right question to take his case to court, ask him in prayer, take it directly to him. And Job is addressing him in the 9th chapter. He's addressing Yahweh himself. There's a switch of change. The he and the reference of him as Elohim, he is speaking to his comforter and his counterpart, but in chapter 10 he is speaking, the pronoun transitions into you, so he is addressing him directly. But he says to his friend right now, his human observer and counterpart, "How much would us answer him? Choose my words with him. For though I was righteous, I would not answer him. I prayed to him for my justice. Though I had called and he had not answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice, for he crushes me with a storm and has multiplied my wounds for no cause." So the first thing we learn is that he's going to be tongue-tied. He cannot explain or justify his righteousness before him who will not hear him. And there is a gulf between the access to the ears of divinity and the gulf that our sin creates in the wicked man. So if you're not receiving an answer to your prayer, that's probably a good sign as any if he's not actively responding or answering or giving you a signal some way. That's probably because you have some unconfessed sin that you need to repent of and address before you can presume on his access again. But Job was, for all intents and purposes, innocent, so what is applicable to Job is thankfully not applicable to us. But he says he takes it personally, and he lays the charge right at he himself, that being Elohim. He's the one who is the author of his misery and his woe. In his mind, he doesn't know that Satan is operating at the behest and the restraint of Yahweh, so he's not allowed to take his life. The 20th verse, if I am righteous, my mouth would declare me wicked. I am perfect, it would declare me perverse. So he could only imagine that he would be tongue-tied in such a situation if he does have an audience with Elohim, but he does eventually increase in his longing. The intensity of his request grows from this chapter on. Am I perfect? Do I know my own soul? I despise my life. So he knows he's not sinless, and he knows that he doesn't know his own soul. That is something that only Yahweh has the internal introspection into and the subterranean sense of. But once more, he's ready to throw in the towel. He wants to quit life. In earlier chapters, he curses the day that he was born, and not only wishes for death, but wishes that he had never been born. If the scourge slays suddenly, he laughs at the trial of the innocent. So he's accusing Yahweh of having a certain sadism. He actually thinks that he's enjoying him going through this pain. What other reason could he have but to, it's like a kid with a magnifying glass with an ant poking the sun at him. That's what. So they're just sadistic. They're taking pleasure in the destruction of those ants, much as he is accusing Yahweh on high of doing to him. Earth has been given into the hands of the wicked. He covers the face of its judges. If it is not he, then who is it? Now, once more, he thinks that God's kingdom includes the evil and wickedness, and he does punish and he does respond in wrathful retribution, but most of the sin and violence and suffering in the world is Satan and sin induced. So he is the God of the world. That means that he is able to use politics, economics, academia to suit his designs and purposes. So he's the one who causes the malpractice, the injustice of the justice system, which in basically every country is corrupt to various degrees. I shall be afraid of all my suffering, and I know that you do not hold me innocent. If I am wicked, why should I labor in vain? So he thinks that he's guilty, even though he can't identify the origin or the cause of his guilt. He feels guilty. He feels he has some sinned, but he does maintain the integrity of his innocence. He is convinced that he has not sinned in proportion to the suffering that he was inflicted on him, and he was certainly correct in that. But if he's wicked, why would he? If he had been this upright and blameless and perfect and righteous and eschewing evil and fearing Yahweh to this point in his life, then why would he, if he was doing it wickedly, then why should he continue living? Verse 33, there is no mediator between us to lay his hand on us both. So he's anticipating and alluding to the mediator to come, the Redeemer, who he also references in the 19th chapter. So the trick as Christians to reading the Old Testament is to look for Yahshua on every page, and he is there, never explicitly, but he is here, such as for now. I don't want to encourage the practice of finding him on every page, because ultimately I feel that invites an excessively speculative, exegetical approach, whereas, recognize him when he manifests and lay hold of it and make the most of what it is. 10th chapter, my opening verse lesson itself, my soul has been grown weary of life. I let loose my complaint. I speak in the bitterness of my being. So life, he had a long and prosperous life up until 8 days ago, but then suddenly the severity of his suffering is such that he not only wishes that he was dead, but he had never been born. So he is exhausted with this experiment called life, the school of life. It has taught him to quit and defeat just because of what was let loose upon him. So he has every right and reason to complain, and he didn't do so until after 7 days in stunned silence, when him and the three dialogue counterparts gathered and just watched him, and they sat and mourned for 7. Then he finally lets it out in the 3rd chapter. But he speaks then as now from the bitterness of my soul. He is bitter at He is bitter at Yahweh, one could say that, because he had served him, eschewing evil, fearing him all the way, making preparations even for his own children in the off chance that they inadvertently sin, preparing sacrifices for them, and then the physical structures which house his children suddenly collapse on them, and is from an east wind that was sent by Satan. I say to Eloah, do not declare me wicked, but show me why you strive with me. So he wants to know what is the cause. He doesn't think himself wicked. He's not aware of any wicked traits or wicked deeds that he has done to merit this. But he has faith that he is being striven with, and Yahweh is testing him. Satan's the one who is tempting him. This was a whole wager between Satan and Yahweh on whether Job would or would not blaspheme Yahweh to his face if he took away everything he had, the hedge of protection. He accused Job of having impure motives and of Yahweh of being an Elohim who was unworthy of worship. He had to pay people who worshipped him. But to return to the point of the passage, the strive, my spirit shall not always strive with a man. But that was when that was in the days of Noah, where the imaginations of their heart were only evil continually. Job had the opposite heart orientation. He did sin, but he wasn't a sinner. He didn't live in sin, shall we say. Is it good to you that you should crush, that you should despise the work of your hands and shine on the counsels of the wicked? So he's questioning, he elaborates more intricately in the 8th through 11th verse of the physical miraculous process of his physical birth and the investment and just the value that he thinks he should have on life, but yet he seems to take delight in destruction of that which he has built up. He's building it up just to tear it down just because he can. And he's accusing him of having partial justice towards the wicked. Now, prior to this point, he had been rewarded in as much as he was righteous, but now he's saying the wicked are the ones who are flourishing in the world. And the prosperity of the wicked is always a test to the righteous, because we are not... most of the righteous are not prosperous in the ways of the world. Job was. That's no blight on his character. He was an honest in his business transaction. But the answer to that question is found in the 73rd Psalm, when Ahab goes to the temple and foresees the end of the wicked. Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as man sees? So the eyes of flesh are the imperfect vision. These are the eyes of sight, which according to scientific study can only detect about 1% of that which can be unlocked by the senses. And we have more advanced sense of sight. Most of the animals and the beasts rely on smell and hearing, but we have sight, and that is... makes us smarter, but we can't even see the whole. We can only see a fraction of the whole, if that at all. So the eyes of divinity, they have subterranean insight. They weigh the motives and intentions of the heart. And so, of course, he doesn't have eyes of flesh. This is a rhetorical question. A lot of these are. Are your days like the days of mortal man? Are your years like the days of a mighty man? So this is, again, a self-evidently obvious answered question. He is immortal. He is eternal. He is more than immortal. Immortal has a mortal people, which he will become, and if we partake in the resurrection and share in his eternality. That doesn't mean we can pre-exist time with him, but it does mean we can live forever. But eternal means he's always been there. He exists eternally so. His existence gave the motion of time itself. So this life that we have as humans is a vapor. It is a vanishing point in the grand scheme of eternity, and he is eternal, and our destiny is immortal. It's one of two places. That you should seek for my wickedness and search out my sin. So he's accusing him of using his super eyesight, his eyes of faith, which can judge the motives and intents of the heart, of searching it so much so that he has just found out a single slip of sin, because Job wasn't sinless. He didn't claim to be, nor is that suggested by the description of him as a perfect man, upright in all his ways. But he's accused, sin is sneaky. It goes from the heart, and Job made a covenant with his eyes not to look on lust with another woman. So, but, some impure motive can conceivably creep in there, and he's accusing Yahweh of it magnifying this infinitesimal moral imperfection out of proportion and out of gravity. For you know that I am not wicked, and there is no one to deliver from your hand. So he maintains his innocence. He's not without sin, but he is certainly not wicked. He is not a sinner in the sense that he lives in sin and doesn't repent and doesn't confess and doesn't sacrifice. He is faithful and obedient in all his ways, but he feels abandoned. There is no one to deliver from your hands. In his eyes, he is the author of all the evil that is inflicted upon him. He's taking it personal, and he's ascribing personal blame. He may not even have the conception of the balance of power and the division of labor and the cosmic struggle between good and evil, which is under the good one's control. But he unleashes evil to the appropriate extent that is conducive to his wise and benevolent and graceful plan. Your hands have made me and shaped me, together all around, yet you destroy me. So I probably said what I should have said after the third verse, but this is just the more, we can also read it in Psalm 139, where David describes how he is fearfully and wonderfully made. That is another eloquent expression of the birth process. So we are the work of his hands. He does not have literal hands, but he does have creative powers, and we anthropomorphize those powers as hands because as humans we use our hands to create, and so we approach the unfamiliar using what is familiar to us. But he is the invisible creator of all that is visible, and everything he designs in the physical world is designed to decay and perish, and according to the laws of physics, physical matter has a mortal shelf life, shall we say, but Job's accusing him of doing it prematurely and unnecessarily. Remember, please, that you have made me like clay, and would you turn me into dust again? Jeremiah's 18th chapter, and I think Paul quotes it in the 9th chapter of Romans, speaks of the relationship that we as creatures of clay have no more right to criticize Yahweh for making us the way that he made us than does a potter for a piece of clay or an artisan's work that has a right to criticize the potter who made them. He gives us all that we need, and we do have, we can't just rely on the excuse of our sin nature and human nature forever. He does give us the ability to decide and come to him and make the correct choices, which can deny itself. But as we came from the dust, so shall we return. This is communicated in Ecclesiastes, and in Genesis we read that Adam sprang from the dust. Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Skin and flesh you put on me, and wove me with bones and sinews. So the 10th verse just kind of elaborates on just the physical foundation of this metaphor is something, the process of making milk and cheese. So the curdling process, he would have been poured out. That means poured out his wrath on him. And then the 11th verse kind of describes his creative prowess. Skin and flesh you put on me, that is beyond anyone's capacity to spring out of thin air. It is through his creative prowess and the process of birth that we have these things, but ultimately the design within our mother's womb does come from us. Life and kindness you have bestowed on me, and in your visitation has preserved my spirit. So this out of context, text without a context is a pretext for a proof text, as a learned man once taught me. So this seems completely out of context in its placement. This is an expression of praise, and he accuses or he praises him and thanks him for giving the gift of life. It was an act of kindness, but he's taking personally the fact that his life had gone in a direction he didn't deserve, he didn't expect, he didn't anticipate, but he maintains his integrity and his faith throughout. So that is what's preserving his spirit. That is why he's able to say such things in the midst of his woes and complaints. And these you have laid up your heart. I know that it was with you. If I sin, then you watch me, and let no wickedness of mine go unpunished. So he's aware of the justice of the punishment for sin. There are consequences for which we have warnings, and therefore are without excuse for sins. We eventually reap what we sow. We reap physical death and spiritual death if we die in our sins. But even a single sin, we can be forgiven of them, but that does not exempt us from the consequences of sin. So that's something we always have to be mindful. We deserve we deserve to be punished, but we also deserve to die. And the Son took that punishment that we merit, all of us. So every time we sin, we are putting a nail in the cross. And a lot of you say, I wouldn't be one of those people, but you did it today, because at some point today, in all likelihood, you did sin, and so did I. If I am wicked, woe to me, and if I am righteous, I would not lift up my head, filled with shame and seeing my grief. So he's accusing Yahweh of being morally indifferent to the quality or character of his creatures. If he's wicked, he gets what he deserves, but he is convinced that he is righteous and he is getting what he has not deserved. So he is ashamed and he has good cause for grief. He's crying tears of in anguish and in spiritual tears just all over the place. He feels shame but not guilt. The difference between guilt and shame is guilt is when we know we have done wrong. That's when we have sinned. Guilt is to the conscience what pain is to the flesh. It warns us that we shouldn't be doing the stuff we're doing. But shame comes from mistakes. So you can be embarrassed and humiliated for making a mistake. Not every mistake is a sin. Every sin is in some sense a mistake. So he feels ashamed because he is not convinced that he has done a sin in proportion to the gravity of the suffering which is being visited upon him. If I lifted up high, you hunt me as a lion, and again you would show yourself marvelous against me. So he's accusing, he's placing himself as a lion who is at the mercy of the human hunter. So lions would have been a top prize, and certainly it would have royal coats. It was the symbol of royalty to be clad in lion. Regal regalia was from lion. So the human is the dominant species. The adversary is likened to a roaring lion, which is the dominant species among the beasts. Backs not away from any challenge, the author of Hebrews writes, but we are superior to them inasmuch as Yahweh, even more so, is Yahweh superior to us than we are superior to the animal life forms. You renew your witness against me and increase your wrath towards me. Changes in a host are with me. So he's accusing him of not revealing to him the sin. He feels he should be convicted if there is in fact a sin that would merit the gravity of this punishment, yet he can only feel the wrath. And these changes, that is no understatement. He had it all. He had a flourishing family, a flourishing trade, numerous possessions, and his health, and he lost that all in the twinkle of an eye, in an hour, in a moment in time, in the grand scheme of things. So why have you brought me forth from the room? Oh, that I had perished and had no eyes seen me. So he returns and reverts to his instinctive state of suicide. He is suicidally minded. He thinks that he not only wishes for death, but wishes that he had never been born. So up until 8 days ago, Job had a pretty decent life, as measured of quality of resources, and but he's just wishing, in other chapters he says he wished that, why was there a mother there to cradle me on her knee, or for a breast for me to suck or nurse on. So he's wishing that no one had ever seen him. He had never been born. He had never been an idea. He had never been conceived. It should have been as though I had not been, brought from the womb to the grave. So he wants to die without, he considers existence a futile waste of experience, life. He had rather not been born at all than to be born and die. So, he's at death's door. He thinks he's going to die any day now. He's just waiting for the final punishment to inflict him. He thinks life can't get much worse. He's not going to get better. He's going to get deader. Are not my days few? Then cease. Leave me alone so that I brighten up a little bit. So he's asking for the mercy and relief of allowing him to just enjoy a single moment of a single day left. Let him get his last experience of joy and hope before I go and not return to the land of darkness, to the shadow of death. So he pictures death as a finality in this verse from this suicidal mindset. But in the 19th chapter, remember, he does allude to the Redeemer to come. He has faith that he lives, and he was, even though he had not inhabited the mortal frame or walked the earth or pitched his tent among men yet, he was alive. He is eternally alive. So he is the one that turns death from darkness into light and life, and death into life. A land as dark as darkness itself, as the shadow of death, without any order, whose light is as darkness. So a lot of people picture hell as the eternal, the lake of fire, which in itself burns without end. But once we are burned, we are cast our bodies. We do not have bodies in hell if we are unfortunate to make it there. What we have is our immortal souls wander disembodied in solitude, in essential loneliness. The hell is a vast space, and there's no one there to comfort you, no one to be with. So he has an ominous portent of what could conceivably await him, because as far as he knows, he was a sinner in meriting of punishment, but he doesn't know quite what the sin is. But we do know with the gift of hindsight. So hindsight, it's easy to point the finger at Job, but we have to have some empathy, because there's literally no parallel experience that we can conceive of or even imagine or relate to from our own personal experience. That's all the time we have today. We'll pick this up in the 11th chapter. We finally hear from Zophar, the Naamanite, but we'll save that for another day. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.